He fell from the 7th floor. It was impossible to survive. He was told he would never get up again. And he traveled 10 miles to hug his son, who did not recognize him. My name's Rachel Myers. And this is the story I've never told anyone, not all the way, not like this. I was 23, working at a used bookstore in a town so small it didn't even show up on most maps. My life was quiet, predictable. Wake up, feed the cat, open the shop, restock the poetry shelves, go home. Lather, rinse, repeat. Until I met him. Liam. He came in one afternoon smelling like rain and eucalyptus, guitar slung over his back like some kind of wandering troubadour. He didn't browse the shelves. He walked straight to me and said, "Do you have any books that break your heart and then glue it back together on the last page?" Just like that. I laughed. Then I fell in love. Liam wasn't like anyone I'd ever known. He had this lopsided grin that made you feel like you were the only person on earth who mattered. He played music like his fingers were channeling something older and sadder than him. But he laughed like a child. Like he'd never known pain. I should have known better. The night it happened, I wasn't there. I still hate myself for that. He was at a party, some rooftop celebration a friend of his had thrown. I was home, wrapped in a blanket, watching a documentary about volcanoes and waiting for his goodnight text. It never came. The phone call came at 2:13 a.m. The woman on the other end was crying. I didn't understand her at first. Just words. Liam, fall, 7th floor, breathing but barely. I don't remember getting dressed. I don't remember driving. I just remember standing in that cold, blinding white hallway while a surgeon said words like vertebrae shattered and incomplete spinal cord injury. I nodded like I understood. I didn't. Not really. Then they let me see him. He looked smaller than I remembered. His skin was so pale it made the freckles on his nose look like bruises. He was motionless, tubes running from his mouth, his arms, his chest. But his eyes, they were open. Wide. Terrified. That's when it hit me. This wasn't going to be a few months of physical therapy and a dramatic recovery montage. This wasn't something we could fix with late-night diner runs and mixtapes. This was the rest of our lives. I took his hand, it was ice-cold and limp, and I said, "I'm not going anywhere." My voice shook, but my heart didn't. Not now. Not ever. A nurse behind me made a sound, something between a sigh and a scoff. I ignored it. I didn't need their pity, their prognosis, their polite sympathy. What I needed was him. Whatever was left of him. Whatever we could still be. And in that moment, watching tears gather in the corners of his eyes, unable to even blink them away, I made a vow no one asked me to make. I was going to fight for him. For us. For the life we hadn't even gotten the chance to begin. Even if he couldn't walk. Even if he couldn't move. Even if he never played another note of music again. I would not let this be the end of our love story. Hospitals have a strange rhythm. A mechanical, unnatural heartbeat. Beeping monitors. Whispering nurses. The distant squeak of rubber saws down long linoleum corridors. You can go mad just sitting still listening. I memorized those sounds. Liam spent 11 days in the ICU. I never left his side. I slept in a cracked vinyl chair with my forehead pressed to the edge of his bed, jolting awake every time a machine made a new sound. I refused to go home, refused to shower anywhere but the tiny, freezing bathroom down the hall. I didn't care how I looked. I only cared that when he opened his eyes he would see me. Eventually they moved him to a recovery ward. Stable, they said. But that word felt like a cruel joke. He still couldn't move. Couldn't speak without effort. They'd removed the ventilator, but he had to suck in each breath like it was borrowed. I talked to him constantly about our first date, the stupid songs he used to write about my hair, the way he always cried at Pixar movies. I read him books, played music from my phone, brushed his teeth, cleaned the drool from his chin with tissues I kept folded in my pocket. One night, a nurse walked in and saw me wiping his mouth with the edge of my sleeve. She looked at me like I was lost. "Honey," she said gently, "you don't know this guy your life. Don't ruin it with pity." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "This isn't pity," I said, staring at Liam's sleeping face. "This is love." But that word didn't seem to carry much weight in that place. Doctors spoke in tight circles behind clipboards. One of them, Dr. Trainer, a man who looked too young to be so fatalistic, sat me down and said, "Rachel, you need to start preparing for a different kind of future. Your boyfriend has what we call a complete spinal cord injury at the thoracic level. T6 to be exact. That means no movement or sensation below the chest. He'll never walk again. Never use his hands the way he used to. You may regain some head and neck strength, but... He paused, letting the silence do the worst part. A talking head, I whispered. He didn't correct me. I should have crumbled then. Should have walked away, just like everyone expected I eventually would. But I didn't. I moved into his hospital room. I brought blankets from home, a string of fairy lights to tape around the window, and a little ceramic frog he once won for me at a carnival. I became his hands, his voice, his everything. I fed him with a spoon, brushed his hair, sat beside him through every humiliation he didn't have the strength to cry about. I remember the first time I saw his mother after the accident. She arrived on day 14, eyes red-rimmed, smelling of expensive perfume and grief. She looked at me like I was the ghost of some mistake. "What are you doing here?" she asked, not unkindly. "You're so young, sweetheart. You can't tie yourself to this. You have a life to live." I just looked at her, tired and hollow, and said, "So does he." But the worst moment, the moment that sliced me open, came 2 weeks later, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows of his room. The lights flickered. Rain slammed the glass. And Liam, for the first time since the fall, turned his head and whispered, "Why are you still here?" His voice was hoarse, thick with shame. "I can't even hold your hand," he said. "I can't even kiss you without someone lifting my head. What kind of life is this? What kind of boyfriend am I?" I climbed into the bed beside him, careful not to tangle the wires, and I pressed my lips to his temple. "You're still you," I whispered. "That's all that matters." But he didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes, that hopeless ache, like something inside him had died that night on the balcony and his body just hadn't caught up yet. Still I stayed. Even when my voice cracked reading the same story for the third time that night. Even when the nurses exchanged glances like I was delusional. Even when Liam begged me, to walk away before I became nothing but his caretaker. Because I wasn't staying out of duty. Or guilt. Or fear. I stayed because I loved the man in that bed more fiercely than I had ever loved anything in my life. Because love isn't just a word you say when things are good. It's a promise you make when everything goes to hell. And I had never meant anything more than I meant this. I'm not leaving. It was day 43. 43 days since Liam's fall. Since our world had cracked open like an egg on pavement and everything we thought we knew bled out onto a hospital floor. We'd fallen into a rhythm, if you could call it that. Mornings were the worst, waking up to machines instead of music, the sterile sting of antiseptic instead of coffee and cinnamon toast. I fed him eggs he couldn't taste. Brushed hair that had lost its shine. Shaved a face that didn't smile. And every day we waited. For miracles. For movement. For something, anything to prove that this wasn't permanent. But nothing came. One afternoon, a young rehab doctor with soft eyes and a clipboard came into the room. She looked nervous, the way people do when they're about to say something they know will hurt. "I brought something," she said, holding out a book like it was a gift. How to Live Fully in a Wheelchair. The cover had a smiling man on it, mid-laugh, sitting on a beach next to a golden retriever. It was everything Liam hated. False cheer, plastic hope, and a future he hadn't agreed to. He stared at the cover for a full minute before he spoke. "I'm not ready for this," he whispered. His voice cracked like thin ice. Neither was I. But I took the book, sat beside him, opened to page 1, and started reading. Chapter 1, Redefining Independence. We read 2 pages that night. I cried through both. The next morning we read more. It became our ritual, between sponge baths and catheter changes, between awkward visits from friends who didn't know what to say and doctors who said too much. We read about things like mobility aids and adaptive driving and intimacy after paralysis. Topics that made me blush, made him turn away, made both of us realize we were grieving more than just movement, we were grieving us. One night, he said, "Do you think you'd still love me if I never walk again?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because the truth sat too heavy on my tongue. "I didn't fall in love with your legs, Liam." He smiled, small and crooked. "No," he said, "you fell in love with my fingers. The way I played guitar. The way I touched you." His voice trembled on that last word. It was the first time either of us had acknowledged what was really dying in that room. Not just mobility. Intimacy. Identity. Manhood. Pride. "I fell in love with your soul," I whispered. "Your music. Your mind. Your stupid, stubborn heart." He looked away. But he let me hold his hand that night, limp and still, but mine. That was the first time I saw it. Not hope. Not yet. But fight. Somewhere beneath the morphine and despair and all the ways his body had betrayed him, Liam was still there. Trapped. Caged, but alive. That weekend I broke down. It happened in the shower of all places. I was at my apartment for the first time in weeks, forced home by a nurse who threatened to call security if I didn't get a few hours of normalcy. I stood under the hot water and screamed into my hands until my throat gave out. Screamed for the life we lost. For the songs I'd never hear again. For the man who used to dance with me in the kitchen and now couldn't even scratch his nose. I collapsed on the tile floor, sobbing so hard my ribs hurt. When I returned to the hospital, mascara still faintly smeared beneath my eyes, Liam looked at me like he knew. I had a dream, he said. You were playing guitar. And I was just watching you. And it was enough. I sat down beside him. Pressed my forehead to his. Maybe it won't be the life we planned, I said. But it can still be ours. He closed his eyes. If you stay. I'm staying, I said, with more conviction than I had ever felt. Even if we have to build everything from scratch. That was the moment something shifted between us. Not a miracle. Not a twitch. But a beginning. The book lay open on the table beside us. Tomorrow we'd read about bowel programs and skincare and all the other parts of paralysis people don't want to talk about. But tonight we were just two people. A man learning how to live again. A woman learning how to love through the fire. We didn't know it then, but that night was the first step. Not back to what we were, but forward into something new. Something real. Something possible. We were home. Not in the running through the door laughing with groceries kind of way. Home was different now. It smelled like antiseptic wipes and medical tape. The living room had become a rehab center, hospital bed, Hoyer lift, catheters in the kitchen drawer next to the silverware. I tried not to think about that too hard. It wasn't the apartment we had shared before the fall. That place had stairs. Music. Him. Now it was quiet. Always quiet. Every morning I'd get up before dawn and begin the ritual. Lift. Bathe. Dress. Feed. Adjust. Encourage. Repeat. It was exhausting in a way I didn't know a soul could be exhausted. And Liam, he was fading. Not physically, his weight had stabilized, the pressure sores were healing, but emotionally, he was slipping into something I couldn't reach. He stopped asking about the book. Stopped pretending to smile. Some days, he wouldn't say more than 2 words. And when he did, they were usually, I'm sorry. Like a mantra. Like a prayer. Then came the twitch. It was a Tuesday. Just after lunch. I'd made him soup and he'd barely touched it. I was sitting beside him on the couch, well, beside the chair, because couches weren't part of our life anymore, reading aloud from some article about neuroplasticity, trying to make hope sound scientific. That's when I saw it. A flicker. A shiver. A blink of movement in his right thigh. I froze. Liam, I whispered, leaning forward, did you feel that? He blinked slowly. What? Your leg. It just moved. He stared down at his own body like it was a foreign landscape. Then suddenly he gasped. I think I did. It was nothing. A flick. A muscle twitch so small it could have been imagined. But it wasn't. We both saw it. And it changed everything. That night, we didn't sleep. We just stared at that leg like it was a holy relic. I put my hand on his thigh and waited for another twitch. It didn't come. But that one moment, that tiny rebellion of a single stubborn muscle was enough. Enough to believe again. From there we chased sparks. Physical therapy restarted. Not in a formal clinic, but in our living room, with YouTube tutorials and broomsticks as makeshift bars. I started tracking everything. Every tremor. Every flick. Every slight pulse. When he wiggled a toe, just barely, I cried so hard I had to sit on the floor with my head between my knees. Eventually he learned to raise his arm. Then a finger. Then his hand. And one day, as I sat beside him folding towels, he reached out with that trembling hand and touched my wrist. Just touched it. His fingers were clumsy and weak. But they moved. I turned to look at him, and he was smiling. Not the polite, hollow smile I'd gotten used to, but his smile. The one I fell in love with. The one that had vanished the night of the fall. I burst into tears. Ugly, messy sobs that racked my whole body. I pressed my forehead to his and whispered over and over, "You're coming back. You're coming back." He said nothing. But the way he looked at me? That said everything. The thing no one tells you about love, the kind that survives trauma, is that it doesn't feel like a Nicholas Sparks novel. It feels like paperwork. Like back pain. Like crying over insurance denial letters while heating up pureed food at midnight. Everyone called me his nurse. Even his mother. She meant well, I think. "You're such a blessing," she'd say, hugging me tight. "He's lucky to have you. Not everyone would do what you do." Then she'd ask how I was managing his catheter changes or if I'd ordered more adult briefs. No one asked if I was sleeping, if I was eating, if I was still Rachel, the girl who once danced barefoot in the rain, who used to laugh so hard she'd snort, who dreamed of opening a cafe that doubled as a bookstore. That girl was gone. I didn't mean to lose her. It happened in pieces. In the way I stopped painting my nails, stopped calling my sister, stopped listening to music because it hurt too much to remember Liam's hands on the strings of his guitar. One morning I caught my reflection in the mirror while brushing my teeth. My shirt was stained. My eyes were ringed with fatigue. My hair was tied in a sad, brittle knot. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. And I hated her. I hated that I resented the man I loved. That I sometimes fantasized not about leaving, never that, but about sleeping for a full night. About eating food I didn't have to cut into tiny pieces and spoon feed. About having a conversation that wasn't about medication schedules or wheelchair modifications. I hated myself for wanting normal. Then one night I broke. It was a Tuesday again. Funny how Tuesdays always seem to hold our turning points. I had just finished cleaning him up after an accident. He cried. I told him it was okay. But after I rolled him back into the living room and made sure he was comfortable, I walked straight into the bathroom, locked the door, and screamed into a towel until I collapsed. I didn't cry. I screamed. All the rage, guilt, and exhaustion poured out of me like water from a cracked dam. And when there was nothing left but silence, I curled up on the cold tile floor and whispered, "I can't do this." Not because I didn't love him, but because I couldn't find me anymore. The next morning my eyes were swollen. My voice was a whisper. I made his breakfast like always, oatmeal with honey, 2 spoonfuls at a time. I sat beside him, the silence between us heavy and strange. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You don't have to stay." His voice was quiet, gentle. He wasn't pushing me away. He was giving me a door, an escape route, one he thought I needed. I looked at him, and suddenly, all the noise inside me stilled. "I know I don't have to," I said. "But I want to." And I meant it. Even in the mess. Even in the loss. Even when I didn't recognize myself, I loved him. Not like before. Not with roses and road trips. But with the kind of love that stays. The kind that scrapes itself off the floor, breathes deep, and tries again. I kissed his forehead. "My name isn't Nurse," I whispered. "It's Rachel. And I'm yours." It started with a Craigslist ad. A hand cycle scratched, sun faded, missing a strap. "Needs work," the post said. So did we. Liam couldn't use his legs, but he'd gained just enough arm strength to transfer from his chair if I steadied him. His fingers trembled, but he could grip a spoon, a toothbrush, the edge of my shirt when he was scared. That was enough. The first time he sat in that bike, parked in the garage under the dull hum of a flickering bulb, he looked terrified. "This is stupid," he said. I knelt beside him. "Maybe? But let's try stupid." So we did. The first few tries were a disaster. The gears stuck. The brakes squeaked. He couldn't pedal more than a few rotations without his arms giving out. Sweat poured down his face. His hands blistered. But he kept going. Every morning he asked me to help him outside, strap him in, and wheel him to the start of the block. He'd pedal until his arms shook, then curse the sky, spit on the pavement, and demand we try again. I became his coach. His mechanic. His water girl. I patched up his scrapes, iced his joints, celebrated every extra foot he traveled like it was a marathon finish line. People stared. They always do. Some looked with pity. Some with discomfort. One woman whispered to her friend, "That poor man." Liam just smiled. "They're watching me," he said. "I must be doing something right." Each mile was a reclamation. Of his body. Of his pride. Of something deeper, something neither of us had known was still buried beneath the trauma. Then one night, as we sat on the porch watching the sky turn lavender, he spoke. "I want to ride to the hospital." I turned to him. "What?" "The one that told me I'd never move again. I want to ride there. All the way. Just to prove I can." It was over 10 miles. Uphill in parts. Across traffic and sidewalks and uneven asphalt. I should have said no. Instead I said when. We planned for 2 weeks. I printed maps. Packed supplies. Called a few friends to meet us at checkpoints. Liam trained harder than ever, pushing past pain until his arms ached and bled. I stayed up late rubbing salve into his skin, whispering encouragement through my own exhausted tears. And then the day came. He strapped in. I kissed his forehead. And together we rolled into the morning light. It took 4 hours. People honked, cheered. Some ignored us completely. But when we turned the final corner and the hospital came into view, tall and cold and impossibly familiar, Liam's breath hitched. He stopped in front of the entrance, sweat pouring down his back, arms trembling like leaves in a storm. Then he laughed. Loud and real. I made it, he whispered. I made it. I crouched beside him, tears in my eyes, and whispered, you didn't just make it. You rewrote the ending. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Because that day we didn't just reach a hospital. We arrived at hope. The house was quiet when we got back from the hospital ride. Not silent, just still. The kind of stillness that holds something sacred. We left the hand cycle in the garage, covered in dust in triumph, and wheeled inside with sore arms and sunburned cheeks. Liam's shoulders were raw. My legs ached from walking beside him the whole way. But neither of us complained. We'd done it. He'd done it. But the moment that haunted me was still waiting. Our son. Eli had been living with my sister for months. He was 5, bright, sensitive, all questions and wild hair and run-on sentences. When Liam fell, I told him Daddy had a big ouchie and needed rest. That he was sleeping in a special place where helpers made him strong again. At 5, that was enough. Until it wasn't. He asked every week, can I see him now? Is he awake yet? Did he forget me? Each time I'd promise, soon. Soon finally came. I picked him up that afternoon. His backpack was too big for his tiny shoulders. He had drawn a picture, stick figures, one in a wheelchair with scribbly arms, one holding a heart, one small boy with a balloon. It nearly broke me in half. When we pulled into the driveway, Eli grew quiet. Is he scary now? He asked softly. I swallowed the lump in my throat. No, baby. He's still Daddy. Just sitting down more than before. He clutched my hand as we walked up the ramp I'd had installed months earlier. Liam was in the living room, clean shirt, hair brushed, breathing deeply. Waiting. When Eli saw him, he froze. Who's that? He asked, eyes wide. I felt everything in me collapse. The heartbreak. The guilt. The truth that sometimes the distance between here and home is longer than 10 miles on a hand cycle. Liam's voice broke the silence. Hey, buddy. Eli turned slowly. His grip on my hand tightened. Daddy? Liam nodded, lips trembling. Yeah. It's me. There was a pause, too long, too fragile, and then Eli dropped my hand and ran. Fast. Fierce. Unafraid. Straight into his father's lap. Liam caught him as best he could, arms weak but open. Eli climbed up, curled into his chest, and laid his head on his shoulder like he'd never left. I missed you, he whispered. Liam's tears soaked into our son's hair. I missed you more. They sat like that for a long time. No explanations. No apologies. Just presence. I stood in the doorway, hand over my mouth, watching the two halves of my heart become whole again. And for the first time in nearly a year, I didn't feel like I was surviving anymore. I felt like we were living. We weren't back to normal. We never would be. But we were back to each other. And that was enough.